Ben Golliver, Washington Post, national NBA writer. Talk a little Sixers, talk a little Last Dance. The final 2 episodes, sadly, are this Sunday night. And we'll get all that and more with Ben Golliver now joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Ben, how you doing this Friday?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys doing?
We're doing pretty good. So, obviously it's, in our area because, this is Sixers land. Anytime that Brett Brown speaks, it creates a lot of controversy. And the latest is, his perception of his superstars is one that he mentioned on the Zoom call that, listen, Jordan and LeBron didn't win until their late 20s. And he believes that people should be patient with Joel and Ben as well. And then on the flip side, he says that as we go, Joel Embiid goes. So, do you think that there is a proper amount of expectations placed on the 76ers, or maybe that now is the time for them to win, and if they don't, things need to be shuffled around a little bit?
Well, no, I definitely hear what he's trying to say in spirit in terms of, maintain patience, let your stars grow together, flip the supporting cast around them, and eventually you can put together a title team. I just think, unfortunately, that's not how the NBA works anymore. And the NBA has got to be one of the most impatient places anywhere. Superstars basically give each other, 3 or 4 years together max. And if it doesn't work, somebody's pulling the plug. And, it kind of bothers me watching The Last Dance. It's so much fun to see those Knicks teams and Bulls teams, playing out like 5 straight years in the playoffs, and the Cavaliers having a nice nucleus. Obviously, we're going to see the Pacers nucleus here coming up this weekend. And, some of these other teams, they really did grow together, but that's just not how it goes in the NBA. It's kind of what have you done for me lately in the modern game. And, that kind of pressure can break up organizations. It can break up partnerships, not just the Sixers. We've seen it around the league here over the last few years. In terms of the comment about they go as Joel goes, I'm glad he said that. I think that does need to be said. Look, if he's not right physically, if he's not playing like an MVP candidate, the Sixers weren't very good this year. They were fine. They weren't winning a lot of games on the road. They were up and down. They had some nice moments. But when he played like an MVP on Christmas, they beat the Milwaukee Bucks, the best team in the league, handily, right? So their ceiling to me is tied directly to Joel Embiid's fitness and to him, performing at his top capabilities. And when you're coming out of an extended stretch like this, player conditioning and player health is going to be the number one deciding factor, right? Who's ready to rock, who can form chemistry on a quick time period. And that's, of course, assuming that they're going to be able to bring a playoffs back. But I think that's why Brett Brown would make a comment like that. Look, a lot is weighing on Embiid's shoulders here at this moment of history for the Sixers franchise.
To me, Ben, one of the things that stands out to me about this team is that when they opened the season, those first 5 games, that looked like a championship caliber team. They were unselfish. They were playing intense defense. And then they just seemed to forget about that style for most of the rest of the year. Do you believe they can recapture what they started this season with and apply that in the postseason? Or is this team just unable to reach that level again?
Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm just going to level with you. I don't think that they can. Frankly, I saw a lot of them this year. I was not very impressed at a lot of different stretches of this season. I think you have to love playing together, or at least love spending time together to really be able to get everyone clicking on all cylinders. And to me, they just look like coworkers. They didn't look like friends for a lot of that season, and that's a big problem. I think when I'm looking forward, they've made so many changes already. I think that partially adds into this thing, right? It becomes this situation where, you're bringing in Horford, you're bringing in Harris, you're trading out younger pieces, you're flipping, the front office at various points over the last 5 years. And I think that creates a certain climate, and it potentially limits how much you have buy-in from all these guys because they're wondering, hey, am I going to be next, or is this plan going to change? Jimmy Butler had a pretty nice tenure there, but it lasted, like 6 months max? It wasn't a very extended stretch. So I think that, there's a lot of turbulence with that organization. You're seeing it off the court, too. One of the biggest stories of the early, coronavirus pandemic was, do the Sixers want to pay all their staffers, or they're going to be cuts and all these kinds of things? And you saw Embiid step up in a big way in response to those stories. But, none of this stuff screams to me championship-level organization right now. There's just too many questions, too many distractions. Maybe they can prove me wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I just don't see it. I think it was the Sixers and the Houston Rockets that actually entered these playoffs with the most questions and the most potential, volatility in terms of maybe having stuff blow up this summer. You know, I could have easily seen the Rockets, if they go out early, needing to make some major moves with their roster. And I could say the same thing for the Sixers and even for Brett Brown himself. You know, I think he's been a guy on the hot seat for a long time, and I don't think that changes necessarily unless they make some real substantial progress if the playoffs come back.
What is the biggest reason in your mind for the team's inconsistencies, Ben?
Well, I think Embiid, like Brett Brown said, look, you got to bring it every single night. When you contrast Embiid and Giannis for Milwaukee, look, those guys are the two most talented players in the Eastern Conference, period. If we're doing a draft, those are the top two guys who are going. Giannis plays hard, plays focused. He's on the court every single night. And to this point, knock on wood, he's avoided serious injuries, right? And he just sets a tone there where they're rolling teams night after night after night. I mean, there was a stretch here where they were on pace to potentially win 70 games this season, and he's not even playing that many minutes because they're just that dominant and that consistent. That just hasn't been the story from Embiid. Embiid comes into the season, he tells us he wants to be MVP and Defensive Player of the Year, which I love, that kind of goal setting. He just didn't back it up. I mean, there was flashes where he did for sure. I mean, he won that magical head-to-head matchup on Christmas. But, you know, one big showing like that is not good enough. And it's possible that just the nature of his body, he's not going to be able to do it every single night. And that happens. You know, it is harder for big guys to have that type of impact in the modern game where it's so fast, it's so spaced out and everything else. But I just haven't viewed him as the foundational rock type of piece this season that they really need. And when he misses time, they look like a completely different organization. And that's, you know, tough to work around. And to me, that's kind of where it starts.
Do you think in your mind that Elton Brand and ownership made a mistake in how they built the team, in the win now type of mentality, when Brett Brown today on the Zoom call mentioned, you know, it took LeBron time before he won, Kobe, well, not really Kobe, MJ, you know, a lot of the guys were 27, 28 years old before they won, implying that it takes time for these stars to develop. Yet you have a general manager who's building the team like they have a 2-year window.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's been a lot of moves that you can question like the whole way through, you know, from Elton Brand. But to me, that says he's feeling pressure from the front office to make it work right now. And I don't think tomorrow is promised with Joel Embiid. I mean, when you come into the league and you're missing, you know, lots of time in your first couple of seasons, you don't have the luxury of, you know, assuming that you're going to be able to build around this guy until he's like 35, like LeBron, right? I mean, I think there is a real urgency, you know, around trying to, you know, put a winner around him when he is healthy and on the court. I think his prime is going to hit earlier than most players, and I think that he's going to need to worry just with his track record of lower leg injuries. He's going to need to worry about how long is he going to be a dominant player. So I understand the thinking from the front office in terms of trying to make it happen now. But, you know, it's not just about age. It's about time spent together. And Horford's a new piece. Tobias is a new piece. Josh Richardson's a new piece. I mean, they flipped their bench over pretty consistently there in Philly. And then Simmons, unfortunately, just hasn't really developed his game in a lot of the ways that I expected he would. I mean, I saw that kid play in high school when he was a junior, phenomenal talent. You know, I'm thinking when I'm watching him, first ballot Hall of Famer potential, right? But I also at that point assumed at some point over the next 5 or 6 years, he was going to develop a reasonable jump shot that he actually trusted himself to take. And that hasn't happened. And that's holding them back as well. So, you know, there's a lot going on there in Philadelphia. I just think, you know, Elton Brand's summer from last summer was defensible. He was backed into a corner with the contract situation with Jimmy Butler. It was a pretty nice save to get Horford. It made sense on paper, but it just really hasn't played out as he expected on the court, and that's unfortunate for them.
Ben Golliver joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN, Washington Post national NBA writer. Ben, kind of more of a general question, but it has to do with the Sixers as well, because one of the things we were seeing with the Last Dance documentary is that, you know, Jerry Krause didn't make a ton of moves. He just made a little tweak there. You know, the Bill Cartwright trade, you know, bringing in Tony Kukoc from overseas, adding Steve Kerr for the second run. It feels like, though, the 76ers have made way too many moves. So which is it? Which is the better way to go about in today's NBA? Is it to try to keep the roster and lineup together for as long as possible? Or is it better in today's NBA to say, all right, last year this didn't work. we got to make changes. Which is the better strategy in today's NBA?
Look, you don't really have a choice. I mean, look, the contracts are a lot shorter now than they were in the 90s. I mean, your max you're going to get a star on is 5 years, and a lot of role player guys are taking 1- and 2-year deals. You're seeing constant turnover in rotations all around the league. You try to build that positive culture that will attract guys, and you hope to kind of keep it together as long as you want. But, you know, look at the Lakers, for example. They probably had the best chemistry in the entire league this past season, but the year before they were an absolute train wreck. You know, I mean, trade rumors, Magic quits on the job. I mean, the coach goes. And so this chemistry question is something that dogs every organization. Once you get it, you try to hold it as long as you can. I've just never really been convinced that the Sixers have ever had it in the first place. And, you know, I point back to the personalities of Simmons and Embiid. Do those guys love to play together? Is there a Jordan and Pippen dynamic between the two of them where they challenge each other and bring out the best of each other? I don't really see that. You guys are closer to the situation than I am. Maybe you feel differently. But, you know, I look at that team and I say, well, these guys can kind of make it work. They can get along. They can have, you know, pretty nice moments. But are they all in and invested with each other? That's what I question.
Speaking of invested, I think one of the things that stood out to me about The Last Dance so far is, you know, the conversation they talked about the Kerr-Jordan fight, and that is when Kerr stood up for himself, Jordan then bought in to Steve Kerr. You know, when Phil Jackson confronted Jordan about Paxson in that game in the Lakers series, saying who's open, Jordan finally bought into Paxson as his teammate. It feels like in The Last Dance, Jordan, for him, as soon as he started trusting his teammates, that's what took him from being this MVP to the GOAT.
Absolutely. I mean, if he never has that light switch moment, his career plays out differently. And it's also important to remember, so his last year with Doug Collins, Chicago's total offensive efficiency in terms of where they ranked was 12th, which is basically middle of the pack. Once they really mastered the triangle offense and they win that first title just a couple years later, Chicago had the number 1 ranked offense in the entire league, right? So, and Jordan didn't have to sacrifice that much. I mean, it's a couple points per game. He's still taking tons of shots, but it was just this idea that, like, you're not the whole team. You don't have to do everything. Share just a little bit and it will wind up benefiting everyone. I think that was Jackson's real main message with the triangle, and it worked to perfection. It was able to get Jordan to buy in, and it paid off with huge dividends and results, and it wound up making Jordan's life a lot easier. I mean, you see in that first three-peat, he's really at his athletic peak. I mean, guys cannot stay in front of him. He's flying through the lane. The Suns can't guard him. The Lakers are struggling to guard him. He torches Drexler in the 92 finals. And part of that reason why is because he's not carrying the same heavy burden quite to the same degree that he was earlier. Now, it was important that they picked those role players pretty well. I thought the front office did a nice job of targeting the types of players who would support Jordan. Find the shooters, right? The superstars always need shooters, right? LeBron James needs a Kyle Korver, or a Ray Allen. I mean, those kinds of relationships are always going to be there. And so for Paxson to come through in big moments, hitting wide open shots, for Kerr to hit a title clinching shot, it validates the entire plan of what Chicago was trying to do and how they were trying to build around Michael Jordan.
Ben, before we let you go, I want to know what you're looking forward to for these final 2 episodes on Sunday night.
Well, there's 2 things I want to see with relation to the Utah Jazz. First of all, I want Brian Russell, the guy who was guarding Michael Jordan on that famous last shot, who kind of got brushed to the ground. I want him on camera saying, I got fouled. That was an offensive foul. The NBA babied Michael Jordan. They always gave him the superstar calls, because I know there's a lot of resentment between Jordan and Russell. They've actually at one point after Jordan's Hall of Fame speech, I think there was a Russell challenged him to a game of one-on-one. I mean, there's kind of a lot of bad feelings about that play because it's such an iconic NBA moment. So I hope that they track Brian Russell down, and I hope he gives his honest take on the whole thing. I think that would just be amazing television. The second thing I want to see is, Jordan talking about John Stockton, because we've seen him really kind of throw darts at a lot of his competitors, whether it's Isaiah Thomas, Gary Payton, Drexler, kind of the list goes on, right? But to me, Stockton is nearly as competitive as Jordan. I mean, you're talking about this small little guy from Eastern Washington, builds a career out of absolutely nothing, doesn't even full-time start in the NBA until he's 25, and he winds up retiring as the all-time leader in assists and steals. I've got to imagine there's some level of kindred spirit there between Stockton and Jordan, and I don't really remember any bad blood between the two of them. because I think Jordan really turned a lot of his ire towards Karl Malone. So I'm hoping that we get some sort of a commentary from Stockton about Jordan and Jordan about Stockton, and that maybe that could help lift up Stockton's place in NBA history here, because I think he's a really important guy for the league that winds up getting underrated. So those are a couple of the things I'm looking for. But, of course, it's going to finish on that big moment, right? That final shot in Utah where he steals the ball from Malone, brings it up the court, and hits that beautiful jumper over Russell. And I hope that they spend a lot of time, just breaking down that entire sequence, because it's one for the ages.
He is Ben Golliver. Follow him on Twitter at Ben Golliver, Washington Post national NBA writer. Also, check out his podcast, The Greatest of All Talk, as well. Ben, appreciate your time here on a Friday, and hope you have a great weekend.
That sounds great. Thanks for having me, guys, and take care. Please stay safe.